Thank you for joining us.
For having me.
Just quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Steven Collet. I'm Vice Minister for Development in the Netherlands.
Great.
And I'm happy to join this conference and happy to meet you here.
Do you have a big delegation here, or is it just a few people?
We don't have a super big delegations because we all fly here and it costs a lot of emissions.
Okay.
So we leave it to what we need. So it's a number of people who actually support me, support negotiations.
Yeah.
And people supporting our initiatives, and I'll talk about them later.
Okay. So it's a good segue because I want to talk about climate. The Netherlands has been a real, a champion of climate finance for decades, but we still have this massive gap in financing, especially now that we have the $300 billion goal for adaptation specifically. We're maybe reaching 10% of that goal. What is the Netherlands focusing on to try and help fill this gap?
Hi. Well, first of all, thanks for mentioning that we have a good reputation here, and we like to keep it that way. So what we have been doing is to stay put on what we consider as an equal contribution. So we have this year we have 2.4 billion for climate financing, which is partly public, partly private mobilization. Okay. We learned a lot over the past years on how to do this and how to increase it. Partly again, it's because we work with public funding to actually support, say, governments, ministries of finance, to get their investment, their public investments right. We are the co-host of the climate finance ministers with Uganda, meaning that we have concrete best practices for how ministers of finance work in their systems to get financing for climate in order. This is ministers from Africa. Okay. And they have a lot of ability actually to improve both on the adaptation and the mitigation side. Okay. Next to that, we have learned a lot about mobilization of private finance, and we have a specialty for us, and that's adaptation.
Right.
So 60% of what I just mentioned, the number is to adaptation. And adaptation is something which is quite difficult because it spearheads mostly on LDCs, and it's about those countries who are most vulnerable,
right,
and assisting them to adapt.
I mean, especially with adaptation, I think what's been the challenge in the past has been getting finance, and private finance into adaptation, making it bankable. Yes. And obviously, there's a huge call for more public finance from the developing countries. Where do you guys stand on this? Are you trying to boost the agenda on public finance, or are you really trying to figure out how to make adaptation bankable for private finance?
We do both, and I think there's a lot of untapped potential in the latter. So what we have been doing over the past years, we have this Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, where we tested out, if you like, business cases for adaptation, which is, for instance, on desalination in agriculture, or which is about land use. In agriculture again, or deforestation agendas. And those test cases, they have all in all generated $1 billion of private capital, meaning that we can make those cases. And the next step would be to scale it up. How do you scale this up? This week in Sevilla, we launched the so-called SPA, it's the Program of Action, which is about actually pension funds investing in the projects of MDBs and DFI. So pension funds can invest into these projects, and that generates a lot of potential capital. The European pension funds, for instance, just to give you an impression, they are total worth 15 trillion.
Yeah.
And they will not just invest into something nice because they have their clients, my pension, at the end of the day, but they also want, for me, to have the end of the day. So they are very conscious in Europe of climate change, of SDGs, and they want to invest into a safe asset class with a good return. And LDCs prove to be a good return because we have historical data, 30 years of data, which is now shared by all the MDBs, the building rights, telling us a story that it's a safe investment, safer than some housing investment or some IT investment.
But you're making this sound so good. You're making it sound like this is obvious. Pension funds should invest in developing countries because it's safe. But that's not really what's happening yet. We're not really seeing that happen at scale. They still feel like it's quite risky. I mean, how are we scaling this up?
Last year, we supported the start or the kickoff of a new asset class, which is called ILX. And ILX has mobilized 1.7 billion of pension funds, which have been invested into SDGs and climate action. So it's been done. There's proof of concept, and proof of concept is needed to increase it.
Yeah.
And what my biggest learning is after 10 years after Addis is that we now know better how to speak the language of the private sector.
Interesting.
Because 10 years ago, we actually said as advocates for development, we need the private sector to invest. You guys and girls need to invest. That's your duty. Now we turn it around. It's like, okay, what do you need as investors, as private sector, for us to be able to work with you on development?
Right.
And it sounds like a sacrifice. It's on their terms, but maybe I was a bit naive to try to do it on our terms.
Interesting. We've seen ODA cuts everywhere in the developed world right now and all across Europe. And I feel like what I'm hearing is that private investors still need public money to go in there and de-risk it. Where does the Netherlands stand on this? Are you worried about the fact that ODA is going down, and are you looking to change that?
I'm very happy you asked the question. In our current political coalition, we had to cut down ODA. And whoever knows what the future will bring. We will have elections end of October. We see that a lot of people understand very clearly that paying 70 cents out of 100 euros for development is not a lot, right? First. Secondly, many people, and also in the Netherlands, they are very, they believe in charity, they are very generous. And third, we also see it as a way of soft power, as a way of enlightened self-interest to invest into the countries around us, basically. So I think the case is very clear for development, yet the pressure on the budgets is also very big.
Yeah.
That means, and that's important, that we should not waste ODA where it's not additional. And that brings me specifically back to the point on private sector mobilization. We see a lot of so-called blending, and that means that you mix ODA, public money, with financial sector money. And I'm very critical of that, because what we learned with this ILX asset class is we only use our public funding for the innovation itself, but the asset class itself, there's no blending. There's not even a guarantee from Dutch government or any other government. So it's purely pension money, and the pension money, the pension funds, they also pay for the costs of this asset class.
So you're saying you don't want to see as much blending here, you want to see them separate?
I want clear guidelines for blending, because I don't want to waste ODA for blending. Yeah. ODA should go to the ones who we cannot leave behind.
Okay. There are a lot of climate funds out there right now. We've got the loss and damage, the adaptation fund, the new TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever facility that hasn't quite, no money has been put into that yet. Are there specific causes when we're talking about less and less ODA that the Netherlands feels align most with their values, or that how do you choose kind of what to put your funds into when it comes to these different climate funds?
But I think first and foremost, as I said, we need to be very critical of blending, not to say that you don't need blending, but we tend to make stuff quite difficult. We developmentalists, because we have all these strings attached. Yeah. We want all these conditions, we want all the niceties, and very logical criteria. And at the same time, if you want the finance sector to work for development, you need to make it simple and scalable. And that's something we still need to learn. So for me, when I'm directing our teams, I'm really critical at new funds, new structures, additional funds, additional structures. Maybe we'll get to some of the discussions around, for instance, debt management in Zul, but that we could get to that later. But the same goes for climate financing. Let's stick to things which work and which are scalable.
Yeah.
For us, it means that we will also focus on those topics and themes where we have added value. And we have been learning a lot on agriculture and failing a lot as well in ourselves as a country, but also in international work. Same goes for water management. Yeah. So we think on water and food, we should focus our adaptation efforts.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I am going to move away from climate finally. Sure. I want to talk about tax a bit. So the Netherlands has come under some criticism for having a central role in tax avoidance with its tax architecture. And we're at a conference where, illicit tax flows are really central to the conversation. How are you interacting with these discussions?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. We have a policy focus on what we call coherency for development, meaning that you shouldn't be spending your ODA on development and at the other hand doing policies or measures which delude from that, right? So you should be consistent. Now, every year we formulate an agenda with our NGOs and our parliament on currency for development, and tax, as you refer to, is one of those core topics, priorities. Over the past 6 to 8 years, the Dutch have really been catching up on our taxation policies. We have actually moved from, you could say, laggards to, say, in the forefront of changing our policies and practices on taxation and international taxation. We have completely adopted, say, the regime which has been developed over the years in the OECD for that. And of course, the criticism doesn't stop, and it shouldn't, because we like critical civil society, because now the ask is, shouldn't we go for UN treaty ourselves?
Right.
Now, to be honest, I can imagine, and this is, to be honest, something which we do not necessarily see the advantage of, because the way we work with the emerging markets, developing countries in the OECD, it has sort of a long-standing practice. It's a practice of experts, and it's a very complex subject matter. So I applaud and I love inclusivity, but again, also on this topic, if we are overly inclusive for the sake of that, then it doesn't lead to better outcomes. So what we need is a countervailing powers to what we do with the experts, but we need the experts to do their work and to improve their work also in view of the interests of developing countries.
Developing countries are saying that without this UN framework, their voices aren't being heard. What's the plan to include their voices if we don't establish a UN convention?
The plan to do that is actually, I beg to differ a little bit, because I visited PrepCom for this conference, talked with a lot of ministers of finance from developing countries. The ones I speak to, and of course you could argue I'm biased, that everyone is biased, but I'm trying to speak to a broad range of finance ministers. They had 2 messages for me. One is on taxation. We need to be involved. We are involved through the OECD process. We need technical assistance to do so. And please continue with that, because it's a trajectory which we now understand. And similar for debt and debt management. We have this common framework. Right. It's not perfect, but we see the sort of the blue book or the roadmap for getting this debt reduction and debt stress reduction done. And we see the lead times. The first common framework country, I thought it was Zambia. Don't quote me on it.
That is the sort of
that took forever, and the last one took, I think, 18 months. Yeah. They understand that framework has the potential of also including private creditors, including, for instance, China, and also these ministers of finance say, if we now dilute this with a new process, with new systems, new rules and regulations, we get stuck. But what they want to sit around the table, learn from each other, and be able to say collectively put their case forward. So they need a forum to get together, which is different, I think, from a UN convention. But again, we have a compromiso, and we're going to see how we can make that work.
As a representative of the Netherlands, what can you do as a country to address these issues on debt? Where I know I was going to ask, do you support a UN framework for debt? You've answered that question, but obviously, change needs to come. According to developing countries, they definitely want to see faster processes. They want to see more transparent processes. What can you do as a really involved developed country to address these concerns, if not having a UN framework?
No. Well, there's this African Legal Support Facility, which sits with the African Development Bank. It's not part of it. We are supporting it, and I think it has proven its worth, because it has prevented a lot of unnecessary debt stress and did a lot to escort countries and ministries of finance and technical assistance. With UNCTAD in the UN, we also have a technical assistance facility which we support. Our power, if you like, or our ability is as a shareholder to the IMF, to the World Bank, and I think we should use those abilities as much as we can. And lastly, we are also a part of the G20. Many times. We're not an official member, we are guests. We are grateful for that, and we use that role as well, actually to ensure that there's an optimum process. But I have to be honest, debt in this reality is very, very different than when we had our Jubilee, and we could say as creditors sit together in Paris, come together and see how we relieve the debt stress. And I'm not denying the debt stress is there. It's been maybe a bit less than it was in those days, but it's really, really killing if you look at the climate stress and other stresses which are adding up and piling.
Yeah. Just one last question. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of text in the document about supporting locally led development. What do developing countries want and how are they going to lead it, especially when it comes to domestic resource mobilization and critical minerals. And, many Dutch programs still come with some earmarks and conditionalities on how countries can spend money. Is there a move to sort of say, we're going to make this more flexible and free up this funding for you to choose how you want to spend it?
Well, we started in our system to define what we mean by locally led, because there's so many definitions that we need. One solid definition, and I think the essence of locally led development is local agency. So it's actually that the one who should be beneficial of the intervention is the one who should be in the lead and who should be deciding. From that principle, we are looking into what do we do with civil society. We have been working a lot with consortia of Dutch civil society, and they work with local civil society. Why is that needed? I'm not saying it's not needed, but we're very critical. How can we improve the agency of local civil society in their own environment, vis-a-vis their systems, their advocacy roles, but also their service delivery and other roles, given the fact that we have already been supporting them for 40 years through Dutch CSO. So we have a very, very critical and sometimes also a bit difficult debate with Dutch CSOs about their role and their added value vis-a-vis local. That's one place. The other place, of course, has to do with national systems, or government systems. I think it's fair to say that we work a lot with very many different implementers and hardly any more directly with governments. Part of that work has been continuing through, say, the EU with their budget support and the bank. But our direct relation with other countries has also been stated in the OECD DAC peer review for the Netherlands, has not been very strong. So we are now refocusing our policies on the dialogue with these countries, which we want to be inclusive. So we're currently putting up multi-year strategies per country, and we focus on Africa. And each strategy needs to have a consultative process with all the stakeholders concerned. So we hope that by doing so, we provide more agency to those beneficiaries which we need to arrive at.
What's the timeline for some of those strategies being?
These strategies are currently being drafted and they need to be ready. This is like Q2 until Q4 this year. So
this year?
End of the year. Yeah.
How many countries can we expect to see these for?
20 something.
Wow, okay.
We have been focusing all along on Africa and the Middle East. We have actually areas we focus on stability and security, on migration, on economy and trade. And we focus on those countries in Africa where those things are at stake. And for me, it's very important to focus on stability, especially in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, West Africa, but also the Middle East, where people are most under pressure, actually.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Minister, for taking the time today. And I hope you have a calmer continuation of the conference and get some sleep as well.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.